This webinar series on connecting with Dr. Hazel Harrison are divided into three main sections: connecting with yourself, connecting with others, and connecting with your community, with an additional section on loneliness. The webinars are divided so that you're able to watch them separately or one after the other. Today we're going to be talking about the science behind connecting and looking at the different ways that we can connect with ourselves, with others, and with our community to improve our well-being. So Hazel, a very warm welcome to you. And so it seems that well-being is very much connected to relationships. I think we will have all have heard during the pandemic so much about the impact on our relationships. Why is it so important? Where should we start?
Well, hopefully throughout the course of these series of webinars, we're going to be able to really unpick why they're so important. But I think the short version is, we know now from the science that they are incredibly predictive of our physical and mental health long term, that actually we really need connection with other people. It's incredibly powerful when we have it, and our body responds quite negatively when we don't. So today we'll have a chance to explore all of that and hopefully offer a few ideas of things that we can all do to nurture our relationships with those that are very close to us, but also those people that we don't know, and those moments of sort of small connection throughout our day. So we're kind of going starting with ourselves, then we're going to think about our friendships, then we're going to think about sort of community.
Okay, so the self first, and this connection with the self. What I get this image of sort of Zen yoga. Is that what you mean by connecting with self?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few areas that we'll talk through today, but I think it's ultimately when we're talking about connection with self, I guess we're thinking about how we have this very important relationship with ourselves that we don't necessarily always think about in the same way that we might think about the relationships that we have with others, but that we are pretty much with ourselves all the time. We maybe have opportunities to listen to the sorts of narrative that might be going on in our mind and the sort of relationship that we have with that. So sometimes that can be quite critical and difficult to manage, and sometimes that can be, really aligned and helpful in helping us to move forward. But I think also our relationship with ourselves very much links to self-compassion and some of those other areas that we talked about last time. But how we have this relationship with ourselves, I think, also sort of scaffolds the types of relationships that we have with other people. So for me, it feels like it's a really important one to start with because it will be influential over how we build connection with others.
Okay, because that's really interesting. You say talking about the scaffolding, the relationships with others, because I remember my a really good friend of mine, when we both had young children, she was going through a bit of a tough time and avoiding really spending any time. I couldn't understand, and eventually it was because she was struggling and thought she was doing a really terrible job, and she wasn't. Her children were always impeccably dressed. Mine, if they had socks on, I felt I was doing well, and my matching socks. And actually, because she had been with herself so much and just was having critical dialogue all the time, she then withdrew from the next pebble. So that idea of the ripple, I can really see how that happens.
Yeah. So should we dig into that? Do you want me to start? Should we go there and we can unpick it a bit more? Okay. So let's start then with connection, and that's what we're thinking about today. And we've been talking about this idea of how we're going to connect to self, how we're going to connect to others, how we're going to connect within our community, and we're starting with connection to ourselves. So I think the first interesting thing to think about when we think about connection to ourselves, Vivek Murphy, who has written a beautiful book called Together, says, the first step towards building stronger connections with others is to build a stronger connection with oneself. And solitude helps us to do that by allowing us to check in with our own feelings and thoughts. Now, for many of us, maybe the last year has offered up opportunity for solitude that we maybe haven't encountered in that way before, but perhaps for others actually has taken that away. depending on what your circumstances are, depending on who else you're living with and what you're juggling, it may be for some that actually that opportunity for solitude went missing because suddenly everyone was in the same place in the same time, all the time. For others, maybe this is offered up an opportunity for solitude, but it's been very elongated, and so in that way maybe there's a possibility that solitude flowed into loneliness. And we're going to talk a lot more about loneliness as we move into kind of thinking about our connections with others. So I think first of all, it's important to think about, how does it actually feel when you're with yourself? Like, well, what is that relationship? And it probably ebbs and flows, just like lots of our other relationships do. We don't have the same relationship with ourselves throughout our entire life. We change, I think, our relationship with ourselves as we change and grow. But I don't know how often, I mean, certainly for me, it's not something that maybe I've spent a great deal of time thinking about. What is my relationship with myself? Like, how is that going? It's not something that maybe I might reflect on in the same way that I might my relationship with others. And yet I think it really is powerful for us to do that. So one of the ways that I was thinking about, how do we then nurture? Like, what does that look like then if we want to think about how do we nurture this relationship that we have with ourselves? And one of the things I was thinking about is how often we say to other people, I'm sure we did it when we came on the call this morning. We were like, oh, hi, how are you? And we check in and everyone has a chance to sort of talk about how they're doing. But how often do we actually do that with ourselves? How often do we kind of go, oh, Hazel, how are you doing? How's it going today? What are you experiencing? What feelings are coming up for you at the moment? And one of the things that I've really enjoyed playing around with during lockdown is Mark Brackett's app called the Mood Meter. So Mark is over at the University of Yale University, and he's written a beautiful book actually called Permission to Feel, which is all about why we kind of need to get a bit more in touch with our feelings and understand that each of them has a sort of important place, so that we can't sort of push the feelings away, that it's important that we get used to experiencing them. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to drive behavior always, but I guess as Susan David says, it's important that we recognize that we have these different feelings as data. And it doesn't necessarily mean we always act on the data, but we're open to understanding that our feelings exist to give us important information about the world. So on the app, what happens is you log in and it just says, how are you right now? And you have this opportunity to click on many different emotions that you may be experiencing. You can choose one. But what I also really like about this idea of checking in with yourself is that it prompts you to do that. It prompts you to go, oh yeah, hang on, no, how am I? Because I think it's a very difficult thing to do without having some kind of tool or mindfulness practice or something that makes it part of your sort of regular habit to check in with yourself, right? There's so many other things that we might do that we might think of as being sort of more important than doing this. So sometimes it's useful to have some kind of tool. It doesn't necessarily need to be an app though. It could just be a post-it note that you whack on your mirror that just says, how are you? A reminder to ask yourself that question. And why am I saying we need to ask ourselves that question? I guess really what I'm saying is that when we start to think about our emotions as being an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to kind of take in information that's guiding us or giving us some important data about what's going on with us, then we can take that and act on it. So maybe how you're feeling right now is lonely. And that might be a possibility to think about when you've noticed that, doing something about that. Other times it might be that it's just recognizing what you're feeling, and that actually just helps you to feel a bit more connected to what's going on. So I think the first idea is this idea of, okay, let's just check in with how we're feeling and get used to having that kind of relationship with ourselves that we might have with others.
Hazel, that's just made me laugh because on Friday, my husband came in from work and he cycles home from work and he was in such a grumpy mood and I couldn't understand what was wrong with him. And then he said, And then I put some food in front of him, and then I said afterwards, oh God, I was actually really hungry. And I said, well, you're a big boy. Why didn't you tell me you were hungry? I can't mind you. And he just said, I don't know. He said, I just was rushing around and get the kids right. And it was just, if he'd have taken 30 seconds to check in, he would have said, actually, I'm really hungry. Let me have a piece of toast. And, but because, and I think that must happen all the time. That's happened to, teachers in the workplace running from one place, and actually even the more fundamental human needs of hunger, thirst,
Definitely.
needing to go to the loo, listening to your body.
Yeah. And because we can so easily tune that out, right? And then it's not until you actually just stop that you realize, oh yeah, I'm hungry, or I'm in pain, or I'm thirsty, or all of those very basic needs, then moving into perhaps slightly more complex needs as well.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it is helpful to start to get used to developing that kind of relationship, I think, with ourselves to begin with, to get used to answering that question honestly. And I think that's the other really lovely thing about maybe having this app, or having some kind of ritual that enables you to do this regularly, is that you can answer that question as honestly as you want. Like, you don't have to, answer I'm fine like you might to people that you don't know that well, or you can actually say I'm really annoyed, I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, whatever feelings are coming up, you can just acknowledge that that's where you're at, and that's okay. No one else is judging you for that. You're allowed to feel whatever you want to feel and need to feel, right? So I think then when we start to do this, we move to this place where we can develop some self-compassion, because we can't necessarily cultivate that idea of kindness to ourselves and empathy towards ourselves when we aren't really being honest about what we're feeling, right? And who we are. So if we are sort of bluffing to ourselves about what's going on and how we're managing, then we don't have that opportunity, I guess, to listen to what it is that we might need to activate that sort of self-compassion. And by that, I mean that willingness to lean into some of those uncomfortable feelings and that discomfort, without judging it, without, it becoming you're a bad person and all of that might be sort of activated. Actually just allowing those things, recognizing that this is a moment of difficulty and struggle, and that many people might move through those. So I think when we talk about self-compassion, and obviously we explored it quite a bit in the previous session that we did, we're really talking about the possibility of giving to yourself. And I think we can't do that without that honest relationship. So for me, I think those two things come hand in hand, like getting to regularly notice.
Sorry, can I just ask, when you were saying that the feelings ebb and flow, and you were mentioning, so you could feel angry or you could feel sad, and most of the time that would you'd expect that to ebb and flow, and as you said, you can reassure yourself it will pass, but be honest with it. When should you feel concerned? Is there sort of set time if you feel angry for days or weeks, or if you're feeling sad? Is there a time where you're feeling it's not ebb and flowing actually, and that's almost more of a permanent state where you should be concerned and seek help?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, Beth, and I think it will vary a little bit. But I suppose if you think about things like low mood, for example, generally some of the measures that are looking at that will ask about your mood over the past couple of weeks, so maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So I suppose those sorts of measures give us some indication of how long we might be expecting to experience a particular emotion without let up before we maybe need to think about taking some action to get perhaps some additional support. But I suppose also it's really important to recognize that our emotions don't exist within a vacuum. We're going to talk about the impact of our friendships and our connections in the next part, but it might be, for example, that it's understandable, we can make sense of what we're experiencing right now because of a certain set of circumstances. For example, if you're experiencing financial difficulties at the moment, then you might notice yourself feeling more stressed and anxious than you would normally, because there's a driver, there's a trigger for that. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to continue to feel stressed and anxious whilst you're experiencing financial difficulties. But I think sometimes it's recognizing, oh, I understand where that emotion's coming from, that can help you to maybe make some, some decisions or take some control. And often control is the thing that helps us to move forward sometimes. It's like actually feeling that maybe there's something that we can bring back into our sphere, that we can be accountable for, that we can do something about, that maybe will bring about that shift. But definitely for people, I guess, who just feel that those emotions aren't ebbing and flowing at all, it may be worth, if they've been going on for a while, talking to a mental health professional and just getting some additional advice and support.
And I guess you've got to notice them first. So actually making that time to notice, you'll be able to pick up those patterns. Okay, great. Sorry, carry on.
That's okay. No, it's good. Okay, so sorry, we've just gone past that. I suppose the last bit was just that idea of, can we then show that same kind of kindness to the kindness that we might offer to friends? And sometimes it's, I think, just really important to remind yourself about that. If we're thinking that we have a relationship with ourselves, right, then this is a relationship that we have to nurture like other relationships, but also, that we have to think about how we behave towards ourselves, and whether that's in the way that we would to the people that we really care about. Because if we're not, then we're not moving to this place of compassion, and that maybe critical nature that we might drive towards ourselves may start to spill out into some of our other relationships too.
No, it's a really powerful question, question to ask yourself.
So I think then moving from there, we can move on to kind of thinking about Brené Brown and some of her work, and this idea, sorry, my computer wants to jump ahead. This idea that, we have to set boundaries too, right? So boundaries are a really important way of us taking care of ourselves and of having a relationship with ourselves. And whatever that might mean to you, this idea of risking disappointing others in order to be kind to ourselves sometimes. I think we all maybe struggle with this at various points in our lives, but boundaries are a really important way of us taking care of ourselves. And we can be incredibly altruistic and loving and helpful to others, but if we've not put in some boundary that means we can take care of ourselves, for example, we might start burning ourselves out. We might not have any resource left to be able to help others. We need to know when actually we have to put this in place. We need to know by checking in with ourselves. I suppose you also get this opportunity to see, how much do I have that I can give right now, and what can I sensibly give?
I think in the workplace, saying to people, actually, and I've started doing this now, and it actually felt a bit freer, because between 5:30 and 7:30, that's a terrible time for me. So all the kids come home from school and it's not a great time. But rather than sort of trying to dodge and try to text while I'm trying to cook the dinner or sort the arguments out, more likely, actually saying, to people I work with, that's not a great time for me. Can we make it another time? I just felt like this, and I don't know what I was thinking. Everyone was like, yeah, of course, there's no worries. And then people in return would say, and actually that's not a great time for me because I've got, whatever, whatever they wanted to do. And it was just, it's just common sense, but people are reluctant so often. So yeah, I like that one.
What I love about that example, Beth, is also that opportunity to give other people permission to put boundaries in too. By you saying that's not a great time, I actually need to be cooking dinner for my kids at that point, then it sounds like enables someone else to say, actually, can we not do that time either? So maybe there's this possibility of the ripple effect of putting boundaries in too, that can be really supportive of your colleagues, of your friends, of giving permission to say, listen, we all have different needs. We can't always, know what else other people are dealing with. And so if we're being open about what we can and can't do, then, that helps support those relationships.
I'd like to say to all colleagues, it's actually also fine to say, I can't talk then, I'm going to go for a walk then, or I'm exercising. It doesn't have to be something altruistic like cooking dinner for your children, which most people, it can be something for you as well. And I think that's perfectly fine, and to be encouraged.
Definitely. Thank you. I think that's really helpful to be reminded, because these are all the things that we're talking about that are about taking care of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose the last area of this, and that I wanted to touch on, is making time for doing the things that you love, right? So in this relationship that we have with ourselves, if we think about the relationships that we have with others, maybe we book time in our diary to go and do something that we enjoy doing with that person. Perhaps it's playing a sport with them, or maybe it's going out for coffee, or, you know, going to see a film, or having some dinner, or being part of a book club. Whatever these things are that we do with our friends, you know, do we think about this in the same way with ourselves? Do we kind of put that time in? That's my time to do the painting that I've started to do, or to, you know, read my book. Or, and so I think there's that invitation then to think about, when we're starting to view this as a relationship that we have with ourselves, then we can perhaps put some of those same sort of dynamics in that we might do with our other friends, to think about how we nurture this relationship with ourselves. What are the things that we need to do to kind of make time for? So in summary then, you know, we've talked about this possibility that we need to just check in with ourselves in order to build this relationship with ourselves, that we want to make time to do the activities on our own sometimes, and to do the things that we love. That to cultivate self-compassion, it will come from this place of actually checking in with ourselves to begin with, to recognize and be really truthful about what we're experiencing, and then to practice applying that kindness and empathy towards ourselves that we might to other people that we really like. And that boundaries are a really powerful way for us to protect the relationship with ourselves sometimes, and that maybe we all will struggle with this. There's no kind of, you know, perfect way to do this, but recognizing that boundaries is a helpful way, I guess, of nurturing our relationship with ourselves. So I'm going to come out of the slide so we can have a chat and reflect about anything in relation to that before we move on to the next aspect of relationships with others.
Yeah, no, I just think those things, they're really simple. So checking in with yourself and doing it honestly, because I think solitude, I think we suffer a little bit from solitude deprivation, you know, because you're always connected to your device. So just because you're on your own, if you're checking, that's not solitude. That's not checking in with yourself. And probably reflecting on that story about my husband, I imagine the reason he didn't even notice he was hungry was because he was quickly checking his work emails the minute he got it. So actually, being able to check in how you're feeling means you can't be connected to things, and it doesn't need to take long. And actually having those boundaries, because you're the only person who can do it. You know, if you're concerned about your balance in life, you know, you need to come up with some things that are important to you and put those boundaries in and communicate those. And I'm sure, you know, 99 times out of 100, I would hope that would be received well by those around you. And so, no, those are really helpful things. And doing those time to love, you know, picking up something, you know, a hobby that you've done before, because adults' hobbies shouldn't always just be looking after relatives or neighbors or children. You know, you should be looking after yourself, because that's a brilliant example to show your own children, you know, well, mummy's playing the piano now, actually, or, you know, whatever you're doing. It's a really powerful message. So no, thank you.
Also, that aspect of getting engaged in a hobby, you know, it links to flow, and that ability to just be fully engaged in the present moment, doing something that just occupies your whole time, can be really powerful for as well.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful, and just to remind you that the full presentation is available in the Be Well team.